met with dozens of candidates, campaigns, elected officials, Democratic pollsters, ad makers. Democrats are focused on the issues going into 2018.
What is the message?
I'll tell you what they're focused on. They're focused on the fact that the president has sabotaged American health care and premiums are skyrocketing. They're focused on the tax scam that's benefited the wealthiest Americans and CEOs and not average Americans. They're focused on.
It sounds to me like you're looking backwards again. I think that was her point.
We're looking at things that President Trump has done since he's been in office. The only one looking at back at 2016 is President Trump. Just look at his Twitter feed.
Okay, Elizabeth?
Well, I think Kellyanne's exactly right. The Democrats are stuck in the denial stage of the 2016 election. They're far away from the acceptance of why President Trump won, and that's why they focus on Russia all the time. I mean, Brad has all these ideas. I don't hear much of it. I hear Russia all the time because I think it's a lot easier for Democrats to blame someone else like Russia or fake news than do the hard work of looking in the mirror and self-reflection and ask themselves, why did millions of people that voted for Obama in 2012, why did they vote for Trump in 2016? And meanwhile, all those issues that Trump campaigned on and won on, whether it's the economy, immigration, crime, pulling out of Iran deal, pulling out of Paris, defeating ISIS, he's doing all these things. He's falling through. So the average American looks at what's going on in the country. They see unemployment down. They see a little bit more money in their paycheck. And yet all Democrats are talking about Russia. I don't think that's a receptive message for them.
Brad, when you talk about the president's tweets, here's one of his most recent ones. Sorry, I've got to start focusing my energy on North Korea, nuclear, bad trade deals, VA choice, the economy, rebuilding the military, and so much more, and not on the rigged Russia witch hunt that should be investigating Clinton, Russia, FBI, Justice, Obama, Comey, Lynch, etc. To the president's point, he's got a lot going on, and he's got a lot of people to answer to. He's got an ongoing investigation when it comes to Russia, and he's got a lot of work to do. I mean, he's putting out there on his Twitter feed that he's trying to move forward.
No, look at the last half of that tweet. It was all about the Russia probe. It was about Secretary Clinton. Look, he has a rally in Nashville tonight. He will lead a chant of lock her up. He's still leading that chant at his rallies. He's living in 2016. Democrats are doing well. We've done well in special elections because we're talking about the issues people care about. The Russia probe will take care of itself. Bob Mueller will have a lot to say. There are committees on the Hill where Democrats and Republicans are talking about 2016 because that's their responsibility.
Elizabeth?
But Democrats on the campaign trail are talking about the issues.
The House committee already cleared there was no collusion, and the reason he talks about it, is because that's all the media talks about. I mean, how many stories we now see the New York Times daily writing these other new origin stories for the Mueller probe and saying a crossfire hurricane. Oh, it actually has nothing to do with the dossier and the Clinton-funded propaganda against Trump using Russian disinformation. The reason he's talking about it, he's not supposed to defend himself.
If you've got an issue with the media,
we only have a few seconds left, Brad.
If you've got an issue with the media, you should take it up with the media. Democrats are talking about healthcare sabotage, the tax scam, gas prices, and farm prices.
All right. We're going to leave it there. A lively discussion for the first day back after a long holiday weekend. Thanks to both of you, Elizabeth and Brad.
Thank you.
Well. John Scott's coming up next on Happening Now. Hey, John, good morning to you.
Good morning, Mr. Hemmer. The on-again, off-again summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un may be back on. But will North Korea meet U.S. demands to completely tear down its nuclear program? Also, Republicans in Congress locked in a battle against each other over immigration. We'll hear from a member of the Freedom Caucus. And one prominent Republican says he's not ruling out a White House run against President Trump. Top of the hour, happening now.
Thank you, John. We'll see you then, 10 minutes away. NASA making a major announcement on its mission to Mars. Meet the Mars Copter and how it could help humans on the Red Planet. send a helicopter of sorts to the Red Planet, launching with NASA's Mars rover in July of 2020. Tarek Malik, managing editor of Space.com. Where you been? It's been a couple months.
Oh, you know, lots of launches, lots of landings, lots of things going on.
Well, welcome back here, because I know a lot's going on. This is a helicopter.
That's right.
That would be designed to be able to see over another hill or a mountain, perhaps.
Exactly.
On Mars.
Kind of like extra eyes on the Red Planet. You know, you fly up, you see the terrain. Something's interesting, something shiny. Let's go see that. That's what they're going to test with this little helicopter.
All right, 2020 sounds ambitious. Well, tell us what they're doing.
Yeah, NASA is already launching a car-sized rover, the 2020 Mars rover, to the Red Planet in 2020. And what they're doing is they're going to send this drone. It's about the size of a softball. And they're going to attach it to the belly pan of this rover. And when they're ready, the rover will just drop it down and drive off to a safe distance, and they'll power it up. It has solar arrays on the rotors. They'll pop up maybe about 10 feet or so the first try, and then go ever higher, go off, and it's never going to meet the rover again. It'll just go off on its own. Maybe take some cool aerial shots of it.
Where can you test this today?
Well, so they have a Mars yard at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory where they actually have a copy of that rover, and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory has the drone itself, so they've been testing it there. But they are going to have to really make sure that they know that the rotors can work in the thin atmosphere of Mars. So they've been using vacuum chambers to simulate that as well. The rotors on this drone copter will have to spin 10,000 times faster than ones on Earth, because the air is it spins really fast. They've been working since 2013 to make it the most durable, the most powerful, and the lightest drone that they can, just to try to meet the atmosphere of Mars. And if they can get that,
you have to make really strong, and you have to make
this to look beyond that next hill, make sure they don't drive off a cliff or something like that. On Mars, NASA wants to send a blimp to Venus and maybe an airship to Titan, a moon of Saturn, and knowing how different propellers and rotors work in different atmospheres is going to be essential for that.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think we got more to talk about that.
It's going to be exciting. Really great stuff.
Hope you come back. Thank you, Tarek Malik. Thanks. Sandra was
stuff. Well, the on again, off again summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, roller coaster, and several other rides get stuck, stranding passengers at Cedar Point Amusement Park in Sandusky, Ohio. The park losing power after a car hit a utility pole. Riders then trapped for nearly 2 hours until the power was finally restored, perhaps getting a little bit more of a thrill than they signed up for. Bill.
You're right about that.
Whoa.
Hope you had your cell phone with you to pass time and not look down.
A snack? I don't know. If you're upside.
So back home in Ohio, there's always this point in Kings Island, like who's got the better roller coasters?
And?
Well, Northern Ohio would argue for Cedar Point. Southern Ohio would argue for Kings Island. Being a Southern Ohio kid, I would argue for, the Beast has got to be one of the best wooden roller coasters in the history of mankind.
Okay.
How do you beat the Beast?
Roller coaster connoisseur over here. I didn't know you were that into them. Okay. Not me. All right. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Happening Now starts right now.
Bye-bye.
And we start with a Fox News alert on new signs. The historic summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un could be on again, sort of like making peace between your children, right?
Yeah. Right, absolutely.
Good morning, I'm John Scott.
Happy Tuesday. I'm Melissa Francis. President Trump tweeting today that North Korea had a solid response to his letter and confirming that a top lieutenant for Kim Jong-un is heading to New York. He is the vice chairman of North Korea's ruling party who deals with inter-Korean affairs and has accompanied Kim Jong-un to all 4 of his recent summits with foreign leaders. All this amid word the U.S. is pausing the new sanctions against North Korea.
His number one concern is not prosperity, not economic. Certainly that's important to him. I'm not suggesting it's not. But clearly this has always been about security. Why nuclear weapons? Why ballistic missiles? Why pointing them at the United States? All because he wants his regime to be secure and stay in power. He's a young man, and he's looking out many, many years down the road, and he wants this regime to stay in power.
Well, let's get the latest from Doug McKelway. He is live at the White House right now. Doug.
Hi, John. From all appearances, it does appear that the Singapore summit with Kim Jong-un is on again. That is certainly the expectation of the President of the United States, who tweeted this morning, and I quote, "We have put a great team together for our talks with North Korea. Meetings are currently taking place concerning summit and more. Kim Young-chol, the vice chairman of North Korea, heading to New York. Solid response to my letter. Thank you." Indeed, cameras did catch Vice Chair Kim Young-chol boarding a flight from the Beijing airport, but just who he will be meeting with in New York remains unknown. We don't know. But he is a major player, close to Kim Jong-un and a former head of North Korea's spy agency. That while preparations move ahead elsewhere.
The president sent over 2 delegations, one for logistics and one for more diplomatic purposes, that are on the ground making the logistic preparations for June 12th. But as the president thereafter.
But much remains unknown. For example, will the U.S. be able to get a full accounting of all of Kim's nuclear weapons? Will it have the ability to verify the destruction of those weapons if these talks get along that far? And there is this question.
Are you going to drag this out over many years, way beyond the president's term of office, so that it's more of a promise?
Also, there is China's massive influence over North Korea. In fact, just today, the White House announced that on June 15th, 3 days after the scheduled start of the summit, it will announce a full list of those China high-tech companies which are going to be facing a 25% tariff, something that will obviously anger China and perhaps influence these talks. And lastly, separately, there is this from the president after he indicated that he would no longer tweet about the so-called fake news media. With this tweet, he said, "Sorry, I've got to start focusing my energy on North Korea nuclear, bad trade deals, VA choice, the economy, rebuilding the military." Well, he was back at it again, tweeting, "The fake mainstream media has, from the time I announced I was running for president, run the most highly sophisticated and dishonest disinformation campaign in the history of politics." But, John, he did give it a rest for 2 hours. Back to
you. Something is better than nothing, I guess.
I guess.
Doug McKelway.
TheDailyMail.com. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to start with that envoy that is coming to the U.S. or coming to New York. So, some have posited that means that the U.S. wants to stop negotiating through South Korea. Is that how you would interpret that, or is that what you're hearing?
Well, not necessarily. The way the White House is pushing it this morning is that it's cautiously optimistic because of that envoy that the June 12th summit in Singapore may still take place, despite President Trump calling it off, because it seems that the North Koreans are responding positively to that letter that he sent to Kim Jong-un last week.
So you think it's about the fact that it's back on, but it doesn't mean that this is sort of, let's get all these other people out of the room and just sort of talk to each other one-on-one?
Well, we've known that they've been having some talks with North Korea previous to this. Now, we don't know what the extent of those are because President Trump himself has not answered questions from reporters asked if he's talked directly to Kim Jong-un and what those talks have been and what levels. However, we also know that when President Trump made this decision that he was going to call off the summit, that it took South Korea by surprise. Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, had been at the White House a day prior, and he did not walk away from that thinking that President Trump was going to call off the summit. Again, that was before North Korea started taunting Vice President Mike Pence, which is really what was the last straw for President Trump. But still, the South Koreans didn't walk away from that conversation with President Trump thinking this was the state of play.
I mean, it seems like it's a very different approach than what we've seen over the past 2 or maybe 3 administrations. The idea of keeping the element of surprise and being unpredictable the way you would in any other kind of negotiation. I mean, if you're trying to do anything else, whether it's business or it's personal, versus diplomacy, where it seems like everybody wants to telegraph their moves 100 steps in advance. The new approach, is it welcomed by a lot in Washington, or is it sort of scary?
Well, the president actually got a surprising endorsement for that approach over the weekend from James Clapper, who he's sparred with on other issues. But Clapper said that Kim Jong-un may have met his match in President Trump because he's also so unconventional and someone that is willing to back away from the table and call off talks. And Clapper also said he does believe that the president is heading in the right path on this and that the summit should still happen as a result of this. And so that kind of tells you where the feeling is on Washington on this particular issue, that President Trump may have been right to call off the summit until he got Kim back to where he wanted him to be at the negotiating table.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that was pretty surprising. There'll always be people second guessing or, saying I told you so when it's all over. It's very easy to sit from the sidelines. One of the biggest hang this, from General Jack Keane earlier, is this idea of what does the U.S. give up and promise and when? We want the verifiable denuclearization, and the timing is very important to the U.S. because I think the president probably doesn't want it to drag out through his whole administration and even into a potential second one. What are you hearing it would make sense for the U.S. to give up in return?
Well, President Trump is saying that he would be willing to Libya, and that's why the White House says this isn't the same as the Libya model. So we could potentially see some sort of diplomatic relations open up in North Korea. We're not necessarily talking about an embassy, but this is something that Clapper also brought up over the weekend about there being a direct line of communication moving forward so that Kim and the North Koreans would feel more comfortable with giving up the nuclear weapons. But there is this question of what complete and verifiable denuclearization means to both parties. Kim's saying that they'll agree to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, but the verifiable question still remains an open one, and that's certainly something that President Trump and Kim would have to talk about at the negotiating table before there's a deal.
Yeah, and with so little verification on the Iranian deal, and the president has trash-talked that so much that he'll have to demand more in this or he'll look pretty silly. Francesca Chambers, thank you.
Thank you.
Breaking this morning, Israeli jets bomb what security officials say was a military training site in Gaza. The strikes coming after more than 25 mortar shells were fired from Gaza into southern Israel. Mike Tobin is live from the Israel-Gaza border right now. Mike?
And, John, the Gaza Strip that you see behind me here has been calm for the last several hours. The Israeli Defense Force put out a formal statement, an indication that they have wrapped up their planned portion of the operation. It remains to be seen if the Palestinian militants are interested in escalating this fight any further. But Israeli warplanes pounded targets from the northern to the southern end of the Gaza Strip. The IDF says 35 targets, both Hamas and Islamic Jihad, were hit. Their targets range from several training camps to weapons depots and what Israel called a maritime target. A smuggling tunnel that stretched under Gaza, Egypt, and Israel was hit several times by warplanes during the course of this operation. Palestinian sources, by the way, tell us those training camps were empty. There's no word on any casualties. Back out live, I turned the camera around 180 degrees because I want to show you something. That rectangular box that is both tan and green, that is an Israeli Iron Dome battery, and those interceptors are inside that box, and they have been activating throughout the day here as the Palestinian projectiles come in. The Israelis say they've knocked a number of them out of the sky, not all of them. There are 3 bombs on their tails and crashing them on the Israeli side. Well, all of that scorched earth you see there is a result of fires started by those Palestinians, and you see them all along the Gaza border. John, back to you.
Mike Tobin reporting live from the Gaza border. Mike, thank you.
Republican leaders scrambling to contain an immigration rebellion with the Freedom Caucus on the brink of forcing a difficult vote and the November midterm elections looming. A Freedom Caucus member gives us his take coming up. Plus, what was called a 1,000-year flood happened again just 2 years later. And this time it may be even worse.
I thought, this is it. We're going to end up drowning in this river. And Gary said, no, 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 we're going to be okay. We're going to make it. We're going to make it.
Herman was swept away by the raging floodwaters in Ellicott City while trying to rescue people. The storm finally calming down by Monday, leaving the city reeling in its wake.
This huge 6-foot wide, 6-foot tall ship came down. All the furniture was moving. The floor had buckled. And with the water's getting higher and higher, Gary, I don't want to drown in here.
It just seemed like it happened in seconds, where it was just an insane amount of water.
and it just was surging down the main street.
Wow. People there shell-shocked. They are now facing a new rebuilding job just 22 months after the last devastating flood.
Wow.
I think that even in some of the more conservative bills that have been talked about, have to deal with this problem a decade from now, 2 decades from now. And I think we're well on our way to doing that.
That is House Freedom Caucus Chairman Mark Meadows on what would happen to the so-called dreamers under his group's conservative immigration plan. His comments come as Republican leaders are scrambling to broker their own deal before Meadows and his team can force a vote. Joining me now with the latest, Freedom Caucus member, Virginia Congressman Dave Bratt. Congressman Bratt, welcome. Thanks for being with us. What's in this proposal?
Thanks, John. Yeah, well, there's been a little misreporting on that. It's not the Freedom Caucus position. There's 25 Republicans that are working with Steny Hoyer and 200 Democrats to do Democrat policy. The Freedom Caucus always wants to do what's in the Republican platform and what we promised we would do when we all ran for office, which was not do an amnesty bill.
You want to vote, right?
Yeah, we want to vote on the Goodlatte bill where there's 200 Republicans, right? We don't want to vote on this Queen of the Hill thing that's going to produce an amnesty, and they know how it works out. There's 4 bills included in there. No one even knows what's in the 4 bills, but they're pushing that process because that will result, the Democrats will obviously offer up a huge amount of votes for a pure amnesty of up to 10 million folks over a decade. And so the compromise bill, the Democrats never want to compromise. We already have dealt with DACA. That is the Goodlatte bill. It deals with all the kids that are DACA qualified, and they get a new status and can join the workforce and et cetera. And the major problem is this latest piece is just a political cycle. They're saying, let's just do a wall in exchange for DACA. Well, then you'll have another DACA in 5 years. And everybody knows that, right? The wall isn't the major problem. Over half the problem we have is from visa overstays and lack of E-Verify and chain migration. And so that's in the Trump plan. The Goodlatte bill is even better than the White House proposal, in my view. It's been studied for 30 years. Senator Obama agreed with most all the points I just mentioned. E-Verify, Bill Clinton did, Barbara Jordan did. But the Democrats used to care about the average worker, right, and their wage rates, et cetera. But now the cheap labor crowd has come in, and the Democratic Party has just gone all off the rails on this identity politics, and they're all in on that. And so Democrats to do a Democrat bill. And the good news is Paul Ryan and our leadership has promised it has to be majority of the majority, Republicans, in order to pass the bill. And so all they have to do to block this is put the Goodlatte bill up for a vote, the discharge petition goes away, and then we can get on to legislating as a conference.
All right. You're talking a little bit inside baseball for the folks who don't follow this necessarily all that closely. But let's talk about what's in the Goodlatte bill. Tick off the 3 or 4 primary points, if you would.
Right. And so the wall and border enforcement is obviously in there. That's a big part of it, right? Drugs are coming across the country. You see people coming in. There was just a surge at the border. But that's not the major part of the problem with immigration. The major part is people come in, right? 7 billion people in the world would love to come to the United States and work, but they'd like to do that illegally, and that's the problem. So E-Verify is the policy that makes sure that we're hiring people who are here legally. We don't have a problem with immigration. We let in over 1 million folks legally last year. That's not the issue here. So E-Verify and the chain migration, once a person comes in, they can bring in their entire extended family, right? Not just the nuclear family, mom, dad, brothers and sisters, but the extended family, aunts, uncles, grandfather, whatever. And that blows up the numbers. And so none of it is aimed at kind of a rational workforce argument, right? We need to bring in the folks that fill the skills gaps. And everybody knows we have a labor problem here. A lot of that's due to K-12, but some of it's due to this cheap labor push. And some of the big business cronies know they don't have to pay the bill. They get the cheap labor. Their profits go up, as Bernie would argue. And then who foots the bill? Hospital overflow, schools overflow, all sorts of issues come with that the American taxpayer, they have a gut feel as to what's going on here. And that's why you don't hear much from the Democrats on it. It's a 60-70% issue that goes in our favor.
How confident are you that Speaker Ryan will allow this vote?
Ultimately, the discharge petition could go through, but it's pure politics, and it's going to draw attention to the American.
I'm talking about a vote on the Goodlatte bill.
I don't know. They should be whipping that harder, right? When they whip other bills, the Secretary of Agriculture calls you on this bill or that bill or the other. No one's getting those kind of calls to whip the Goodlatte bill, which is 30 years of rational policy that'll actually solve the problem and help the Dreamer kids. It's a total win-win. But the irony is it looks like the Democrats are winning when the Republicans are in control, and there's no better way to dispirit your base. And all the Republicans, we promised, right? Tax cuts, we delivered. But on this one, we cannot blow this issue. Everybody knows this is one of the issues that separates the American people from the elites up in the swamp, and everybody knows that.
Congressman Dave Brat, Republican of Virginia, will be watching. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You bet. Anytime.
Students are returning to school in Santa Fe more than a week after the mass shooting there. We are live from the school to see how students are handling the day. And after 2 years in a Venezuelan prison, an American couple, is finally coming home.
I just want to thank every single person that prayed for us, that was here for us, everyone that was worried about us, everyone that helped us in whatever way that...
Josh Holt and his wife are finally back home in Utah after 2 long years in a Venezuelan prison. You can hear the couple getting a warm welcome from their friends and family at the Salt Lake City airport. Holt and his wife were held in prison under suspicion of terrorism and gun running. A long-term diplomatic effort by members of Congress helped free them. Holt's parents say they are glad this long, emotional roller coaster is finally over.
High school students in Santa Fe are back in classes. The building reopened to students today for the first time since that deadly shooting more than a week ago. School officials have pledged counseling resources, and they say there will be additional officers on campus. Casey Stiegel is live in Santa Fe at the high school now with more. Casey.
And Melissa, I can tell you we have seen ourselves that increased police presence outside of Santa Fe High School here this morning, 11 days after gunfire interrupted the first period here. The crime scene tape is gone, most of the glass is repaired, and the building now once again open. And what a sight. Look at this video early this morning. Dozens and dozens of people just lining the streets with signs, waving to passing school buses, cars, posters reading Santa Fe Strong, we love you. Bystanders, some wiping tears, who felt doing this today was important, they told us, on so many levels.
I'm here for support for the students, the school bus drivers as they're pulling up, and they're from everywhere. Here's Humble. And the love and support and the strength of God that I have to help them stay strong as well.
10 people, 8 students and 2 teachers were shot and killed at this school after a teen student gunman admitted to shooting those he, quote, didn't like. He remains in jail. 13 were seriously hurt. Many survivors say, including the students, that returning to campus today, it's exciting and sad. In other words, bittersweet.
I have mixed emotions. In a way, I'm kind of glad that we get to go back to school, because I don't want that day to be the last day I ever step foot in my high school. But also, I'm so worried. I'm kind of scared.
11 days later, and sound like that doesn't get any easier to hear, Melissa. Officer John Barnes, real quick, the school police resource officer, you remember, who was shot while trying to subdue the attacker at the time. He was just upgraded from critical to serious condition yesterday, so a step in the right direction for his long road to recovery. Back to you, Melissa.
Heartbreaking. Casey Stiegel, thank you.
Yeah.
President Trump holding a campaign-style rally tonight in Tennessee aimed at shoring up Republican support in Congress. But could he actually face a challenge from within his own party in 2020 for the White House? Plus, 3 weeks after erupting, Hawaii's Kilauea volcano shows no signs of letting up.
Lava started making its way down the streets, fire, public works, police, all, the area was defined. They went door to door to get the people.
Just 1 year into President Trump's first term, but at least one Republican is looking at 2020 as a chance to possibly run against him. Retiring Arizona Senator Jeff Flake saying he's contemplating entering the race, adding that he hopes President Trump faces a challenger or two in the GOP primaries.
It's not in my plans, but I've not ruled anything out. I do hope that somebody runs on the Republican side other than the president, if nothing else, simply to remind Republicans what conservatism is and what Republicans have traditionally stood for.
Let's bring in our panel. Brad Blakeman is former Deputy Assistant to President George W. Bush. Dave Brown is a Democratic strategist and former senior advisor to Washington Senator Patty Murray. Thank you to both of you for joining us. Dave, let me start with you. I mean, what I find somewhat amusing about this is that Jeff Flake has voted with President Trump 84% of the time. So I don't know, I mean, I don't know what he's opposing.
I think it's a great point and really so underscores that Senator Flake has been all talk but really no action when it comes to opposing the president. He's still a sitting United States senator. If he wanted to grind the Senate to a halt day after day to oppose President Trump's agenda, he could do that. Instead, he's chosen to support almost every single one of the president's nominees, no matter how unqualified. He's failed to stand up to the president on immigration. And, he gives a really good speech. But I think at the end of the day, Senator Flake needs to take action, and he's failed to do that.
Brad, what I find amusing on both sides of the aisle is that it seems like there's this, I guess, rather clever game to poke the bear, to sit out there and, do anything you can to try and inflame President Trump, and then hope he responds on Twitter or hope he calls you out by name and use that to get yourself attention. I mean, we see it from politicians, we see it from people writing books, we see it from comedians, and it seems to work spectacularly for getting yourself attention. Is that kind of what Jeff Flake's doing here, do you think?
Absolutely, but the president isn't taking the bait. As Dave properly pointed out, how do you go against the president when you voted for him 84% of the time and his policies you support? Your platform is, gee, he's not a nice guy. Well, guess what? Nice guys finish last, and Jeff Flake may be a nice guy, but he's not going to go anywhere against an incumbent president like President Trump, who has a record to run on, a record that Senator Flake supports.
Yeah. Dave, who do you think would be an effective person to stand up against President Trump, as you put it? You say somebody's got to stand up against him. I mean, there's a lot of voters that don't agree with that because they support the president. But who, in your mind, could mount an effective challenge?
Well, sure. And first, let me say, I sincerely hope that Senator Flake does run. I suspect that all Democrats would be very pleased to see a crowded Republican primary field in 2020. But look, I think for someone to be effective at competing with this president, who can sit back and send a tweet and capture an earned media news cycle, it's going to have to be someone who's as charismatic, who can command a bully pulpit, can frankly probably self-fund, because, and Brad might correct me here, but I imagine Republican donors are not going to be super supportive of a potential spoiler in the race.
Well, there's never-Trumpers. I mean, there's a lot of never-Trumpers out there, and they certainly raised money last time. Do you see that person, Dave, though? Are there any names, anybody out there that could be effective?
At this point, I know Governor Kasich has expressed interest. We saw how well he did last cycle. Senator Rubio, if he grows a backbone, I'd love to see him jump in the race.
Brad, what do you think? I mean, is there anyone on the Republican side that could pose a threat?
No, and I think the reason is that Trump has a record. Now, you may say, God, I wish he would have not done this. I wish he would have not done that. I'm talking about stylistically. But you can't argue with success. And if I was advising the president, I think that would be my mantra, is you can't argue with the record. And the economy is doing well. He's making inroads in foreign policy that people have thrown their hands up for decades and said it's impossible to deal with the North Koreans. It's impossible to put their feet to the fire in Iran. He's changing the dynamic and turning politics on his head, and he's having it with great success. I don't see any Republican having the wherewithal, both financially and ideologically, to challenge this president.
Dave, I've heard Democrats say the exact same thing, that is their concern, that you may hate his style, but he has a lot to point to in terms of results.
I have to respectfully disagree with that. Look, he's very good at being bombastic. He announced hastily a North Korean summit before he summarily canceled that summit, but apparently it's back on today.
Now. Yeah, now that looks like a smart move. He walked away from the table and he got, everybody snapping right back on his terms.
Is it a smart move, or is it just this news cycle and something else will happen tomorrow? I mean, look, I think anybody who read that book that he had ghostwritten for him, The Art of the Deal, knows that he thrives on being unpredictable and throwing, a hand grenade into the mix.
That's a good thing.
Hang on, Brad, hang on. You talked about the Iran deal. First of all, we are completely alienated from all of our allies in Europe.
That's called leadership.
Brad, it's not leadership.
Yeah,
we are literally the only country that is no longer.
Sometimes you got to go it alone when you're standing on principle.
Brad, well, first of all, devil's in the details. Let's see actually what happens with this summit. I think as a former administration official in the George W. Bush administration, that President Bush, like President Obama, much more methodical, much more strategic in how they engage with
foreign powers. Can't argue with success here, though. That's the point.
There's no success to point to.
Though, Brad. I mean, isn't that the point? Is that there have been many who have walked this road ahead of President Trump and were in the situation that we're in, and they did it the traditional way.
Right.
And now many Americans want to see someone just try something else. The definition of stupidity is doing it, or insanity, doing it the same way over and over and over again to the same bad.
Libertyville Fire Department uploading the video, some calling the delay a tornado timeout. Luckily, just a little one.
That's great. All right, the FBI out with a serious warning in today's meeting could be back on track.
This president, in that letter last week, I thought really got some kinetic energy going. Folks all of a sudden said, wow, this may actually not happen, and if we want it to happen, then we're going to start moving it. Ever since then, practically, North Korea, South Korea, and the United States have been making very positive moves.